So this poem, The Second Coming, by w.b.yeats, which is one of my favourite poems, and it begins beautifully, I think, with this line about this falcon turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. It starts, and it continues. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. And that whole first section of the poem the whole poem is in two sections, I guess. And that whole first section, which begins with that image of this falcon turning and turning in the widening gyre, which is like this inverted funnel. No, yeah, it's just like a funnel, you know. So you have this image of this bird just going like higher and higher, and more distant from the falconer on the ground. It begins like that, and that whole first part is about this separation of things falling apart and the centre not holding, and anarchy being loosed upon the world. And a kind of state of disrepair, a new kind of fallen state. Because this poem was written in 1919. Bits of it were written before that. But it's written just after the First World War, just after the Russian Revolution, just after other revolutions that swept Europe. So the whole kind of, I don't know, just after the fin de siècle, you know, the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, things are a bit unsteady. Feels like a bit apocalyptic, as if we're in the end times, you know. And the whole poem is something of a both a kind of mourning for the loss of the old world, and a slight trepidation of what kind of new world might come to being, if there is a second coming, if some rough beast comes out of the east, some rough beast, the second coming. But the things that fall apart, you know, at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, it's not just, for me at least, it's not just about revolutions and the aftermath of the First World War. It's also about a shift in human consciousness, at least in the Western world, brought on by what must have felt like apocalyptic forces in terms of science and philosophy, and just the knowledge about who we are and what we are. When I think about this, I think about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And the four horsemen for my apocalypse there, the apocalypse that Yeats was kind of writing about there, are figures from history, really. The four horsemen there are, for me, Darwin, Freud, Marx and Einstein, riding on these horses, bringing chaos in their wake, anarchy loosing upon the world, causing this blood-dimmed tide to be loosed. You know, Einstein, because through the creation of special relativity and general relativity, it's this idea that those old absolutes, the absolute space and time that the clockwork Newtonian order put in place, was all those kind of absolutes are upset. The rain's coming down on me. You know, so he's loosed that bit of it. And Freud has loosed the unconscious upon us, saying all this rationality that we have, this carefully balanced and organised mental life that we're so proud of, is just a thin film on chthonic forces that have just been at the surface, sex and death, powering our lives from the bottom, in this, you know, this dark sump of the imagination. And then there's Darwin, of course, you know, that just demonstrating so clearly that we're not some special spiritual creation separate from the beasts, but we're beasts ourselves, you know, and the much lauded consciousness that gives rise to rationality and thought and poetry and art, and that's born out of the blood and the guts and the tide of blood that is swept through biological history. You know, we are all the sons and daughters, not just of life longing for itself, as Cahill Gilbran puts it, but also the sons and daughters of serial killers and cannibals and predators. And then you got Marx, you know, so active, and whose ideas were so active in the forces that led up to the Russian Revolution, which was so strong in the popular imagination when Yeats was writing that poem. You know, Marx just laying bare, or would seem to be laying bare, the fabric of the social world, the social orders. It was no longer again the divine order which seemed to have been in place. You know, like in that hymn, you know, all things bright and beautiful. The second verse of the hymn, all things bright and beautiful, goes like this: the rich man at his castle, the poor man at his gate, he made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. You know, that ordered estate, God-driven ordered estate. You know, Marx comes out of it and says, no, that's not, there's nothing godlike about that. Not only do you not have a soul, there is not a God in heaven to organise your estate. The things are the way they are, because the rich and powerful, the owners of the means of production, have put them like that. And the only solution is bloody uprising and the seizing back of the reins of power. Phoebe! So all the old order, you know, the old Europe, the old world was coming to an end there when Yeats is writing this poem. And it must have felt like these apocalyptic forces, perhaps vanguarded by these four horsemen of the apocalypse and the ideas that they were powering: Darwin, Freud, Einstein, Marx. That must have seemed like a blood-dimmed tide, and anarchy, mere anarchy, was being loosed upon the world. It must have felt like the end times, you know, and the only thing to look forward to is the hope of some kind of second coming, even if it is some rough beast shambling toward Bethlehem, as it says in the second part of that poem by Yeats, slouching towards Bethlehem, slouching towards Bedlam. Yeah. Sun's going down.